Hello, my name is PJ Composite, Superintendent of Schools for Meridian 223. I am extremely grateful that you're taking the time to listen to the State of the Schools message. In about 15 minutes, my attempt will be to explain to you where we've come from, where we are now, and implore you in the coming weeks to provide us your feedback so that you can inform us through our strategic planning process as to where you think we should go in the future. So in order to do so, I'm going to walk us through what occurred over the last 8 years. The last 8 years have been volatile for a while, and I think we've hit a different path. And I will go through and I'll work through the actual kind of data that we examine and share with you what we see as our strengths and what we see as our continued challenges, and that may reflect your experiences or it may not, which is why it's so important that as we look at next steps that we get to hear your voice. So our journey has been complicated. Those of you that have been in the district for multiple years understand that. Where we're at right now is would not have been easily predicted, I think, 5 to 7 years ago. So let's take a look back before we start talking about where we currently are to provide context so that we understand where we've come on our journey together. In the spring of 2013, before I was in the district, the board and the interim superintendent at the time put a question on the ballot seeking additional revenue to help support the district, which at the time was in a significant deficit budget that was not sustainable, and were facing making significant cuts. The referendum was defeated, and defeated somewhat resoundingly. I was brought into the district as assistant superintendent and high school principal the following year under the interim superintendent, Dr. Willis. At the same time, the board had massive turnover, as well as several people either left their positions or new candidates ran and beat out incumbent candidates. One of the short-term solutions that they proposed were selling working cash bonds. And what that would do was to temporarily raise the tax rate to provide 2 to 3 years of relief so that the district could kind of figure its way out. Those were petitioned out. To get petitioned out, that means that 10% of the electorate signs a petition saying the board just can't have access to that money and raise taxes. Instead, the community needs to vote on that. At that time, after they were the working cash bonds were not going to be available to the district was needed to make dramatic cuts or really run the risk of becoming financially insolvent. In a board meeting in February of 2014, 24 positions were eliminated, meaning 22 current employees impacted. The difference there, that delta, is simply that we had some positions that were open that were not filled at the time that we just pulled off. In May, I took the head as superintendent, and I was the 5th soup in 3 years. So on top of all of these big financial issues that were impacting literally everything, that trickle-down effect, we also had some other outstanding issues that we hadn't mentioned yet, which was that we were technologically very far behind, and in terms of how we were taking care of our buildings, we were very far behind in terms of we are mandated by law every 10 years to do a health, life, safety inspection just to get our building up to code, and we had done the audit or the inspection through our architect, but we had not taken action on those items, and there were over 100 items that we needed to work on. All of this is taking place with the big looming debt crisis of our district over our heads. And so as we decided to move forward, the board did a very astute thing. The board decided that we need to move forward in some type of systematic fashion, that for years we had just been kind of putting band-aids on major wounds. And so the board decided that we needed to articulate what we believed in, and we needed to articulate what our goals were, and then we needed to make sure that our spending aligned to those goals and that we were communicating that transparently to the community. And what you see here is the placemat that we've created in our second and third iteration of going through and identifying our mission, vision, values, and strategic objectives. The areas I want to point you to are the strategic goals on the outside. Those have been unchanging for my entire duration here, and the board is committed to staying focused on that. So our primary goal is to make sure that our students are learning, so academic achievement. But we need to do so in a fiscally responsible manner. So we need to pursue our goals with a great deal of fervor, but we can only do so with the amount of financial resources we have. And while we're doing those two things, we want to make sure that our district culture is as strong as it can be. And culture isn't exactly climate. They get confused for each other. Culture is how we do things around here, how we view kids, how we view our jobs. It's about being highly engaged in our job and highly satisfied with our job. Culture to me is extremely important because as we try to continue to make pretty significant change to achieve the vision you see there of having small town values but world-class results, a strong culture will allow us to continue to push change at a rapid level and continue to maintain kind of the morale of the group. And then organizational effectiveness is that we had no true systems in place, and our goal is not only to create wonderfully operating lean systems here, but to create those systems that are effective in spite of any individual. So if I were to leave, if the board were to turn over, if principal A, B, C were to leave, we still have systems in place that would perpetuate our success beyond any single individual. So after the board committed to kind of going through a strategic planning process outlining the mission, vision, values, goals, the referendum came back on the ballot. So once the working cash bonds were petitioned out, the board said if we're going to ask the voters for anything, we might as well ask for the referendum again. And so there was a tireless effort to communicate the impact the referendum would have on the district if it passed, and the impact that the district would have to take if it didn't pass. And the community came out and supported nearly 60-40 in favor of a 7-year term referendum. The 7-year term is really important. I'll explain that as we get further in the presentation. It was important for us that we communicated a dramatic amount during the referendum so that everyone knew what was going on within the district and the impact, positive and negative, that the additional revenue would have. The really hard part was that we communicated so much more than was typical in the past that even as we were trying to build trust, people didn't trust that we would continue to communicate that way. They thought it was just in an effort to secure additional money. So what we've tried to do is communicate a ton, whether through social media, newsletter, press release, etc., just so that people know that that wasn't a one-time thing. And hopefully over the last 5 years, we've helped to build back some of the trust that was lost. And then once we got through all that logistics, we had a lot of work to get done in the district. Now, in this entire time of confusion and upheaval, I want to be very clear. The teachers were doing a heck of a job. They were not being supported and they were not being provided vision, but the teachers themselves were doing a great job. So we had a lot of change to make to support our teachers, to make sure that we had ambitious vision, to create systems, and to make sure we're doing all of this in the most financially responsible way possible. So the number of changes we made in the district, just in a quick brainstorm session with our leadership team, is well over 150 changes. That is good and bad. It's good because it shows that we're committed to trying to progress forward. It's bad because so much change so quick, it's hard to tell what is responsible for our success. But I want to be very clear that our 4 major progress areas relate directly to the goals that the board set forth. We've instituted a continuous improvement process based on the Baldrige Framework for Excellence, which is rooted in research and best practice at the federal level. Additionally, with Baldrige, it's not simply an education framework. It's a framework that is fairly agnostic and is used in healthcare, nonprofits, manufacturing, and education. We've stayed financially and fiscally responsible. We've spent money as we've intended to spend it, and been very intentional and strategic in how we do so. The culture, which was damaged both in terms of how the community viewed the district and how the district operated internally, has been changed. We're using a scientific process to measure our culture now, and then that allows us to be informed in how we try to improve it. And our efforts to continue improving performance across schools has taken root, and I think we've made a lot of significant differences, and I'll brag on that in a second here. So we are particularly proud of a handful of things going on, and again, there's so many things going on that it's hard for me to detail every one of them. But if you have a student in K-5 and next year we're extending it up to 6-8, they're a part of the Leader in Me program, and I get probably the most compliments about any change we've made from our community about Leader in Me because of the difference in the impact it's having on our kids and that our parents are able to see it. So if you're unfamiliar with Leader in Me, it's basically a student and school driven curricula based on the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which was written by Dr. Stephen Covey. We have This was born out of our last community-informed strategic planning process, and we are exceptionally proud of what's going on there. You see a computer cart there. We went from having very limited resources and horrible connectivity to having ubiquitous Wi-Fi and ubiquitous access to computers in every single classroom. So any teacher that wants to use the web or a computer at any point has access in their classroom, which means that our kids have access at all times to technology. This is a massive change in 5 years. We've done over $11 million in facilities repairs and improvements. We're current with health, life, safety. Our buildings are up to code, and we have a long-range plan as to what our next steps are to continue to improve our buildings, and if we're dreaming big, to look at potentially what a new building could look like 5, 10, 15 years down the line. And we have a really innovative partnership with HumanX. We're one of their lab schools, which means that basically they're doing research with us as we're trying to accomplish things. But they are the partner that we use to measure our culture data so that we can assess how we're doing. And again, it's a cross industry, which is really important to me. So we're not just measuring school versus school, district versus district, measuring ourselves compared to Fortune 500 companies, highly competitive Division I athletic programs, universities, etc. So we get a very real image of how we're doing in terms of our culture compared to highly effective organizations. So I just told you a lot of things about how I feel things are going. If I were you, I'd ask, what does that actually mean in terms of hard data? So number one that we need to look at is the money. When we look at the money, you can see that we have dramatically changed our condition from FY14 to where we believe we're going to be at the end of FY20. We've gone from roughly 25% of our operating expenditures in reserve, which means that what we anticipate to spend and month-over-month expense, when we're down to 25%, that means that in the bank at certain times we'd have almost no money because of how bills come in and payroll goes out. Now we're at around 75%, which means we're extremely healthy. But you'll notice that we've kept right around 75% because our intent isn't just to stockpile money. Our intent is to be in a healthy position financially, but to use as much money as we can while being financially responsible to attack our goals and try to improve our district. This graph is intended to show you that this is the net. So when we are looking at what our tax rate does compared to our EAV, and there's a bunch of data, and if you read our budget at a glance document, it explains all this in great detail. But what we get per student in tax dollars compared to our peers, you will see that the only district that secures less per pupil dollars from their tax rate is Rochelle Elementary. And just so you're aware, when you're looking at the tax rate for Rochelle, that means that it's Rochelle High School and Rochelle Elementary, so those two could really be combined together. So when you look at what we're pulling in compared to our peers, and then how we're educating our kids, we really are providing a bang for a buck education. Academically, we are concerned with a couple of things. We use a nationally normed, which means that they take data from hundreds of thousands of kids throughout the country, and we measure ourselves against them. And this is what we choose to do instead of the state. The state continues to change their standardized assessment. This will have the 4th iteration of it in like the last 7 years, so it's really hard to track long-term data. So we have decided to work with a partner, Renaissance, and the test is called STAR. So if your kids are in district, you've heard that terminology before. Our goal is two things. One is we want their percentile rank to jump each year, which means that if I start in the 50th percentile, that means of all of these, if I'm in 6th grade, all of the 6th graders that took the test across the country, if I'm in the 50th percentile, I'm exactly average. So by the end of the year, we want our kids to move from the 50th percentile up. That just means that they're outpacing their national competition. So what you see in the black bar here is the percentage of kids at each school and then overall that jumped up in terms of where their percentile rank is from the end of, we did better at the end of the year than the beginning of the year. And in the red, they use a data point called grade equivalency. And so what this is saying is that our kids are capable of completing work at X, Y, or Z level. Throughout the course of the year, there's 9 months, so we want each kid to grow at least a year every year of school, which makes sense. So the red line shows how many of our kids are growing at least a year every year of school. So there's some positive things to take from this in our ELA data, and there's some positive things to take from this in our math data. This is not where we want to ultimately be. So while we are pleased with the data, we are definitely not content with it. This is not world-class values. This is very good, and we should be proud of it, but this is not world-class. So that's our quick look at K-8 data. Our look at 9-12 data allows us to look at the ACT and the SAT and comparing ourselves to the state and what we've done previously. You'll see right now that we are in a 3-year stretch of having the highest ACT scores in the history of the district. While that is factual, true data, it is also very important to me that I explain to you that not every kid takes the ACT like they were doing in 2010, 11, 12. These are kids that are self-choosing to take the ACT, so the scores might naturally be higher. But again, when you compare ourselves to the state, which again is a bunch of kids that are choosing to take the ACT, our kids are outpacing them. The SAT is now mandated, so every junior in the state of Illinois takes it, so we can measure ourselves against our peers here. And you can see that in 2017, 2018, compared to our regional peers, we're doing well. We'd like to catch Byron, and we'd like to catch Pecatonica, but that's just not where we're at. So part of what we need to do in this process is be incredibly factual with where we're at and where we want to be. Here's a look at the cultural data. The top right box is what is referred to in the dream box through our partnership with HumanX. It means that our employees are highly engaged and highly satisfied. What this shows is that 74% of our employees within the district feel both highly engaged and highly satisfied, and this ranges from everyone from myself to leadership team members to teachers to mechanics to custodians. This is an overview of the entire district. We're very pleased with that number. Again, we want people to be satisfied and engaged because it allows us to make difficult decisions and to move forward with right change that needs to take place to continue to move our organization forward. And so I just showed you again some data. So if I was a skeptic, I'd sit there and say, Composite, this is great, but are you cherry picking the data? Does this really mean what you're saying? So just to go over a handful of the recognitions that we've had over the last 5 years. The last 3 years we've been recognized as a top high school in the country by U.S. News and World Report. We had never been recognized in the years previous, and this is not something you apply for. They just use the hard data from the state assessments. So that is an exceptional honor. And of those last 3 years, I believe with very high certainty that we're the only school in the state line to have been honored all 3 years. If you look over to the far right, you see schools of opportunity selection criteria. What schools of opportunity are concerned with is equity and access. So are we doing what we can to ensure kids are staying in school, have access to rigorous courses? Are we treating all kids fairly? And are we looking at school as a social emotional support system as well as just an academic system? We were the only high school in the country to receive a school of opportunity recognition, which is a national award, and the academic award from U.S. News and World Report. So we are doing some things correct. District of Distinction is another national recognition in which our leadership process and our systematic approach to growing leaders was recognized. Illinois Performance Excellence is the clearinghouse that determines if you're using Baldrige framework for systematic improvement across healthcare, manufacturing, nonprofit, and schools. They determine how well you're doing. This year we were tied for the highest rated organization in the state of Illinois in terms of our approach to systematic continuous improvement. And while I was hesitant to talk about any individual, I think it is definitely worth noting that we are the only district to have finalists for the State Teacher of the Year the last 2 years through the Those Who Excel program. So I've taken 5 to 10 minutes to explain the history, 10 minutes to tell you where we are and to brag on us a little bit. The bottom line is that we still have significant challenges in front of us. The referendum that we went out for was a term referendum, which means that in a couple of months here we're going to have to start the intense dialogue as to are we going to attempt to extend that term referendum. What that would mean is that no tax increase, but the tax rate would stay where it's at forever or for another term and how it's going. So our job as a district is to tell you here's what would happen if we extend it, which means that we can continue to progress toward these goals in the same fashion we are. And if we don't, then we're going to have to start making cutbacks and looking at things a little bit differently. So we have big financial questions and challenges ahead of us. Our performance, we still have significant questions. So again, we are near the top of our region. If you look at the Northwest quadrant of the state of Illinois. We are borderline elite when you look at districts that way, but we're still not where we want to be. We're not world class, and we have significant deficiency areas when we break down the data to smaller chunks. Our culture is really strong right now. I've said this 2 or 3 times in the presentation. The importance of having a strong culture is to weather the storm of significant change year over year over year. So while our culture is strong now, the question becomes, how strong is our culture as we continue to evolve and change and pursue greatness? And then systems improvement, while we were the highest rated organization in Illinois, we still were only at the bronze level. There's a silver and gold level that we can aspire to be. The important thing that we need to talk about with systems improvement in ILPEX and Baldrige is that it is impossible to chase an award with that. That is, you have to redefine kind of the entire ethos of the organization in order to pursue those awards. So that process has grown me personally more as a leader than any other process we've gone through. So it's not just about chasing an award. It is about changing how we kind of view leadership and view the systematicity at which we approach problems. So that's where we're at from our perspective. The question becomes then, what is next for us as a district? And this is where I want to kind of implore you, if you took the 20 minutes to watch this, thank you so much. I cannot express my gratitude. Please tap your neighbor or your friend and say, please watch this too. It's important, because in a few weeks we're going to send out some information and we're going to seek feedback from you to see what other things that you want us to be considering as we look through the continuous improvement process. Because for us, we are going to continue to improve. We are going to continue to listen to our community, and we are going to do whatever we can to chase that vision, which is that we want to maintain our small town values, but we want world-class results. We need to understand better from the community what that world-class results means to you. Again, thank you so much for listening to this. My contact information is pretty much everywhere, but pcapozzi@mail.meridian223.org is email, and my cell phone is 815-980-0310. Thank you so much, and I look forward to starting a dialogue together.